The psychology of Gen X, the generation that learned to be chill the hard way. Before we start, quick question. Do you know a generation that grew up without Google, survived without constant praise, fixed things with duct tape, and still somehow raised the internet generation? Yeah, that's Gen X. Born roughly between the mid-1960s and early 1980s, Gen X is often called the forgotten generation. Not because they did nothing, but because they quietly did everything. Let's break down the psychology of Gen X in a simple, real, and slightly funny way. Gen X grew up in a very different world. No smartphones, no social media, no mental health day at school. If you were bored, your parents didn't entertain you. They said, go outside. And somehow, Gen X did. Psychologically, this created high independence. Gen X learned early. Figure it out yourself. That's why many of them are calm in chaos. They don't panic easily because, well, they've seen worse. Another big Gen X trait? Skepticism. Gen X doesn't blindly trust systems, companies, or authority. Why? Because they grew up watching. Companies lay off loyal workers. Politicians break promises. Institutions fail silently. So Gen X learned one core belief. Don't trust words. Watch actions. That's why Gen X humor is sarcastic, dry, and brutally honest. No fancy motivation quotes. Just, yeah, we'll see. Now let's talk about emotions. Gen X feels deeply, but doesn't show it loudly. They weren't taught to talk about feelings. They were taught to handle them. So instead of saying, I'm emotionally overwhelmed, they say, I'm fine. Psychology calls this emotional self-reliance. It's strong, but also heavy. That's why many Gen X adults struggle with opening up. Not because they don't feel, but because they were trained to survive silently. Here's something interesting. Gen X is extremely adaptable. They went from landlines to smartphones, paper maps to GPS, offices to remote work. They didn't grow up with technology, but they learned it. Psychologically, this made them flexible thinkers. They don't fear change. They expect it. While other generations argue about old versus new, Gen X just shrugs and says, use whatever works. Parenting psychology? Oh, Gen X changed that too. They didn't want to repeat the emotional distance they felt growing up. So they tried to be more present with their kids. But at the same time, they still believe in toughness. That's why Gen X parents often say, I love you, but also deal with it. A mix of warmth and realism. Let's talk about work mindset. Gen X doesn't chase job titles for validation. They value stability, freedom, work-life balance before it was trendy. They don't live to work. They work to live. Psychologically, Gen X believes success is quiet. No constant posting, no loud flexing, just results. And finally, the biggest Gen X trait of all, resilience. Gen X didn't grow up with constant reassurance. They grew up with reality. So they developed thick skin, dark humor, and emotional endurance. They don't complain much. They don't dramatize everything. They just keep going. Not because life was easy, but because stopping wasn't an option. So if you know a Gen X person who seems calm, sarcastic, emotionally reserved, and surprisingly wise, now you know why. They didn't grow up soft. They grew up strong. And honestly, the world could use a little more of that quiet strength today.